It is. Yeah, I don't know anything about racing. This is true. You're right. You're in the wrong show.
Yeah.
You're watching the wrong show if you want to hear like super engineer stuff.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Hitting the Apex. I'm Vish, joined by Evan. As always, Evan, how's it going?
Good. Exciting weekend. Finally, we had some good racing.
Yeah, there was some lot of interesting racing. I didn't, going into the weekend, I didn't expect us to have to, allocate a segment to a complete technical meltdown at the track, but I think we're gonna have to. And talk about all the issues they had throughout the weekend. In terms of just the technology failing, but yeah, not sure if we're going to see an appearance by Jazz Santana, but we'll see. Much like Ferrari, he might not fully show up, but we'll see. He walked right into that one. We'll see how that goes.
He did.
Yeah, like you said, it was a fun weekend. A lot of good racing. I guess first we'll review the predictions. You had Lando, George, Oscar, and Yuki in the top six. Nailed the George pick, reversed the McLaren drivers.
Yep.
Harley had Max, Lando, and Kimi. That
didn't really pan out that well.
Yeah. Kimi had some issues. Lando finished third, so that wasn't bad. Yeah, the Red Bull was just way off the pace this weekend. We're going to talk about that too. And then I had Lando, Oscar, George, so mixed them both up. Max DNF. There was a time there when he was on the hard to the middle stint, and he was like, "I don't know how to drive this." I was like, "Retire the car." But he drove it home as he always does and collected some points, which will eventually probably pay off for him down the road. But yeah, like you said, I guess what's your initial impressions of the race? It was very it was an entertaining one. Yeah, what were your initial thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. It was definitely a more entertaining race, especially comparing it to the week before in Suzuka. There was a lot more overtaking. There was movement all the way up and down the field. There was really good, racing, even in the midfield and the backfield, guys making overtakes and going for moves that just were kind of, unexpected. You saw a lot of really good moves. And then you saw a couple of the drivers that we haven't seen, running up there in the front, like Gasly, like Ocon, having good races, So overall, it was entertaining in just that sense that it was something different from the week before. It was more exciting. That Bahrain circuit, like we talked about last week, is a track that all these guys know. They're all comfortable with. We expected it to be a much better, race, and I think that's exactly what we got. So I'm super happy with how this weekend went. I wish we would have saw a little bit more out of Lando, but he kind of shot himself.
We're gonna have to dedicate some time talking about his overall weekend. Yeah, to your point, this was we talked last week about how bad the Alpine was, and Gasly was running up in the top 5 much of the race, brought home 6 points. Yeah, that was definitely an unexpected surprise there. Yeah, I think there's two real big. For me, there's two really overarching takeaways from this weekend. One is, Lando's overall performance, and two, just how reliant everything is on technology now, and how that failing really caused all sorts of issues throughout the weekend, starting with qualifying where, who was it that
Hulkenberg.
Yeah, Hulkenberg went fully off the track and no one noticed, and he proceeded to Q2. At which point, he
knocked out Albon.
Yeah, he knocked out Albon, and then only after Q2 they say oops and they switched him. Now, is that the worst mistake they made? No, they kind of ignored their own rules to decide the championship a few years ago. But it's in a way it's more of an unacceptable error just because it's obvious. Like, it actually turns out Aston Martin actually flagged it and said, "Hey, we think he went off the track." Like all 4 tires off the track, and then it turns out after the fact they checked and was like, "Oh yeah, he did." And that's just, I mean, what are you're not doing your job then. They should have people watching all of their onboards, anything close, they should be looking at it immediately. There's no reason that should take, there's a gap between the sessions, so there's time to get that right. There's absolutely no reason for that to happen.
Yeah, and it wasn't even just the FIA. It seemed like there was a lot of issues, with a lot of these teams. This week we had Red Bull with their light in the pit that they were having issues with that. You had George Russell even towards the end of the race having issues with his electronics on the steering wheel. We saw that
his telemetry failed, so that's why they couldn't detect his DRS.
He couldn't detect his DRS. He was having issues with his ABS, with with the settings on the wheels to be able to change that as well. So he was basically driving that almost half that last stint, without being able to adjust the ABS on those cars, which they do quite frequently. They swap the brake balance and stuff like that, getting a more bite in the front and more bite in the back, depending on how the turns, what they would need for each one of the turns. So it's like you could see that there's some of these little gremlins that are starting to creep up. I don't know if it's just a fact that we're seeing how reliable these cars are mechanically, and now we're starting to notice more of these little technical issues with the cars. But especially with Red Bull, with the starting light that they had in the pit lane, that's just unacceptable, man. You're multi hundreds of millions of dollar organization, probably almost $1 billion organization with that race team and with Red Bull in general. That how are you having issues with your starting light, with your pit lane release light? It's one thing that just you can't see that, and you could see how frustrated.
Well, so let me ask you a question on that. Do you think it was the light, or do you think, because on the pit stops after that, they had issues with the wheel gun and getting the nut off, and I wonder if it was, because all that stuff is integrated now to tell them that the tire. I wonder if there was actually a problem with the wheel gun that was why the light wasn't. Because remember, the next stop they couldn't get the front right off of Max's car, so
it might be. You're right, because they have to be off the.
I don't know if it was their car, or because there's also, this is official tracking. That's how they determine DRS on. So it's not really on the teams for those transponders. It's really provided by the FIA and linked back to points around the circuit, which is how they detect, gaps and all of that, and that then feeds the TV, which is how we see it. So obviously, like you said, in his after his pit stop, all of a sudden he dropped down to last, and then back up to ninth, and then back down to last, and he was second the whole time. Usually, when we see someone do that, if they've crashed, right, then you kind of see that, but he obviously didn't, and so from then on, that's also the same system they use to detect DRS zones, and so. Not only could he not detect, although he was nowhere near Piastri, not only could he not detect that, but as drivers came up on him, which was ended up being Lando, they couldn't detect a 1 second gap because they didn't have the gap to him. The only times that George was getting was at the start finish straight for the full lap. So I mean, I don't know. It was a weekend of kind of a mess on the telemetry. A part of the race, the whole timing and scoring went out, and they kind of lost it all at one point. I don't know what happened. Like you said, like we talked about last week, this is kind of a circuit that's used a lot for testing. So it shouldn't, you kind of don't expect it in this location.
Yeah, but again, things happen, situations happen. Overall though, the fact of the matter is the racing was still good.
Well,
whether the timing of it was messed up, the racing was still good.
Yeah. But let me ask you a question on the George Russell thing. So he ended up switching off like the computerized DRS, which will automatically make it available if you're within 1 second of the car in front of you. They said switch it off, then you'll have to manually activate it when we tell you. And then he accidentally activates it and then slowed down the next corner to kind of give the time back that he gained by using it on the straight. They got permission from the FIA to disable it and make it a manual system, and I guess the button was the same one that he uses to talk. It was a dual purpose button where you like double tap it to do one thing and single to do another thing, and he accidentally activated it. So they said he didn't really gain an advantage because he gave the time back, so they kind of let it go. Should he have been penalized?
No, especially with how everything had started out, where there was multiple issues. If that was the only issue of the weekend, if that was the only thing that had happened, I think that maybe they would have given him something, maybe a 5 second, which would have obviously helped out Lando. But
And helped out Leclerc too, yeah.
yeah, but I don't think that it was warranted with everything else that happened. It's one of those situations of you can't just penalize him for our mistake or for the FIA's mistake or Bahrain circuit, whoever's issue it was with the transponders and stuff like that. So I think that they made the right decision in not penalizing him. As a McLaren fan, it would have been nice. I was sitting there when I saw the text come through that says that he's being investigated. Going, oh wait, hold on, Lando might get second place now. And then when they said that he did it and they explained why, I was like, okay, I understand that.
Yeah, I guess
it was the right
my
move.
only caveat to that is, so I agree with you. I don't think he deserved a penalty because that they went to the FI and they said, hey, we're going to disable this and all that, and they got the thumbs up before doing it. So it'd be a little bit disingenuous then to be like, well, you did this and penalized him, but they didn't make him activate the DRS, obviously. And Mercedes has to know they're assuming that risk in a situation where there's basically no chance he's going to use DRS. They didn't have to touch it. He was way behind Oscar and in second place. When was he going to get into a situation where he was going to overtake with DRS?
Yeah.
So, I don't know. And there was the laps were dwindling. It didn't make sense for them to go through all that to give a manual override on something that he was most likely not going to use. Unless there was another safety car, in which case they could have messed with it under safety car.
Well, so, I mean, they also were probably thinking they were also probably thinking that Lando was going to get right up there behind him.
Yeah, but once Lando passes, but he still wouldn't have DRS because he'd be the trailing car. Once Lando passes him, it's over. Yeah. So again, I don't think it was very little chance. To me, that's a lot of overthinking it. Yeah. They have these teams; they plan everything down to the minute detail, so they have a procedure in place. That's what they executed. Hey, if the DRS detection fails, we do these 3 things. I'm going to give you a bunch of settings. It's going to disable this, and then this is how you then activate it manually. The question is, did they ever think, hey, we don't need to do that. This is not a relevant scenario right now. Just let him drive his race. He wouldn't have even known the DRS wasn't working because he never was going to hit the button. And I think that's kind of where you take on some risk when you take away the electronic safeguards and say now it's manual, and then you activate it. Again, he gave the time back immediately, and I think it would have been harsh. But I also they chose as a team to mess with all of that. I will say the penalties in qualifying to me were less justifiable than if they had penalized him in the race when they penalized them for leaving the pits a little bit. Again, I feel like the FIA overcomplicates these things sometimes. So they gave out the provisional time.
Yeah.
We're going to start around now, and they hadn't confirmed it yet. So Mercedes left the pit box, and they said, well, no, you left before they confirmed time, which is normally a fine or something. So they penalized them, which to me was uncalled for. To me, that was crap. That was an honest mistake. It was a team error. It did not affect anything. Because you could argue as much as they want to say, he gave the time back. Yeah. He still got some time by hitting the DRS, even though it was minuscule, but he ends up finishing, 0.7 ahead, and Lando got close multiple times. Is that 0.2 or 3, is that little bit, because that's the margins on overtaking matter in the race. For the qualifying, no, they were all queued up anyway. To me, that was just, I don't understand.
That was a little much.
I think that's ridiculous. I thought that was completely unfair, and I thought they, especially George, who did such a great job in that qualifying run, got kind of taken from him. It was crap.
Yeah, I can see that. That makes a lot more sense to me.
That's a team penalty. Find the team or something, or do something with the team, right? They released them. You're kind of
they told them to go out.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was, to me, that's what they should look more at. Okay, does this affect, does this affect the racing? Does it affect the result? Obviously, if you break a rule, you should be penalized. But this was more of come on. You flash up multiple. There's no reason to say provisional start and then actual start and then have. I mean, what are we doing?
Imagine if they would have qualified one, or if George would have qualified first. That would have been even more devastating.
Yeah, I mean, and so to me, that was over penalizing. If anything, I thought a penalty in the race because there's unknowns in terms of how that actually affects things.
Yeah.
Would have been more justified, but I think they got that right in not penalizing him. But I think in the future they should tell everyone, hey, if you're going to disable these electronic overrides, you're responsible for what happens.
Yeah.
Don't come later and say, well, we cheated, but then we gave the time back. Because normally, if you activate DRS when you're not allowed to, that's a huge
penalty.
Yeah, that's a bad one. So, but I'm glad that they didn't penalize him. It wouldn't have been fair.
Yeah.
Especially 5 seconds drops him down to fourth. That would have been very harsh.
Oh, yeah. No, it would have been more than that. It would have been almost fifth, right?
Yeah, no, he would have been fourth. The time's up on the screen. So Hamilton finished pretty far back, actually, of Leclerc, 8 seconds. So, yeah, he would have dropped down behind Leclerc. So he would have been fourth.
Yeah.
But, yeah. All right, so let's talk about a couple of other things before then we'll spend some time on our friend Lando here. So I will say, we haven't talked about Ferrari yet. They nailed that strategy and then got screwed. The safety car is the worst possible time for them.
Oh,
so that going long on the mediums in the first stint, they were going to go long on the mediums in the second stint and end on the softs. So they were actually lapping faster than the lead cars. Leclerc, was looking like he was going to best Lando pretty easily by the end of the race as they had to still pit, and then the safety car came at a horrible time for them when it was too many laps away to go to the softs, so they had to go to the hards because they hadn't used 2 compounds yet, and it kind of ruined their race that they were running very well. So they actually, what do you think overall of they took a risk starting on the mediums when most of the runners started on the soft. So what do you think of that strategy? And obviously they got bad luck in the end, but what do you think of that attempt there?
Well, I mean, I think the attempt was sound. We saw that there actually was degradation on these tires, but we also have been talking about how these tires are more resilient now than they've been in a long time, and they really showed it because they were lapping very well on those mediums for a long time, and they did have that strategy down packed. Now, I think what we can also go into in the same thing is going into that pit stop. That was kind of a ticky-tack flag or a ticky-tack caution. I think that there was some stuff on the track, but it wasn't really a lot. But I mean, overall, with going back to Ferrari, I think that they did kind of have that strategy down packed, nailed it. It was a good thought process because they were able to still keep up with those guys that were on the soft, not quite as quick as them overall, but they being able to stay out a little bit longer. The undercut though really helped out, a couple of these drivers in this race. So, except for, when you have Leclerc and Hamilton out there staying out as long as they did, we really didn't get to see exactly what would have ended up happening if they would have been able to go with their whole race plan. They could have been up there with Piastri and Russell and really
it looked like they had pulled a pretty good move by running long because they started the mediums, everyone else started on the soft, so everyone else competitive did. So yeah, it looked like they pulled a pretty good move because at the time of the safety car, both those cars were lapping faster. They were moving through the field pretty quickly, and it looked like he had gotten past Lando, Leclerc had.
Yeah.
And it looked like they could still have plenty of life in those tires and then switch straight to the softs and be the fastest at the end.
Yeah.
Looked like it was in play, and then obviously, like you said, the safety car. That's a good point on the safety car. I thought VSC have someone sweep up the corner a little bit. I did not think it warranted bunching the field back up like that.
Yeah.
And I don't know. And also, to me, debris on the track, unless it's like unpassable, which it clearly wasn't because they drove a few laps before they threw the safety car. To me, that's just, I'm sorry, you got to deal with that's racing. Like sometimes you run over debris and it pops a tire. To me, the safety car is exactly for what's in the name, safety issues. I didn't see there was a safety issue there. The track looked totally passable. Yeah, if someone tried to pass all the way on the outside turn 2, they would have run over some debris.
Yeah.
Okay. You got to adjust to that as a driver. I thought if anything, they could have just left it. I certainly didn't think it was a full safety car, which again really impacted Ferrari badly. Helped out Red Bull, who was trying to get off those hard tires that Max
Yeah,
did.
Max hated those things.
Also hurt Mercedes a little bit. They would have liked to have run longer, but George had a fresh set of softs that he was able to go to, which kind of sort of held up. I mean, I think it was, at that stage, it was probably a little bit too long to run effectively on softs, a little too, and then the hards are crap, so no one wanted to run on them. But Ferrari chose the hards because they had new ones. And Russell had a set of softs that he went to, and by the end, all of them were off the pace, and actually, the medium was the one to be on, which is why Piastri just cruised away from the rest of them. And at some point, I guess now we could have the Lando conversation, how he somehow managed to not end up in second on a weekend in which their car was way better than everyone else. I guess let's start with qualifying. That second run in Q3 was just a complete disaster.
Yeah, which has kind of turned into his MO as of recently. We've kind of always known Lando as this, one lap specialty guy. He's always been good in qualifying, being able to extract performance out of that car over, in Q3 and be able to get all good times. He was faster than Piastri all of last year. He had him, I think, out of the races, it was like 70% of the time or something like that. He qualified ahead of Piastri, maybe even more than that, maybe like closer to 80% of the time he qualified faster than Piastri. And this year it just seems like every single week there's something that happens on that last run in Q3. We saw it in China, we saw it at Suzuka where he just, he can't complete that whole lap. And he's been talking about it all week, that he's uncomfortable and he feels like he can't even drive a Formula One car right now. And for somebody who we all think is a title contender, he's still leading the championship. It's kind of disheartening to see somebody like that, come out and not show that confidence that we know that he has. He's really got to kind of look in on himself and see. Overall, I voted for him for driver of the day on Sunday, even though he had issues, but it was because of the fact that he had these issues and he still came back. He had all these situations and he still came back and fought. Think about it. If he would have got ahead of Hamilton, or if he would have got ahead of Leclerc on that restart, he could have been battling with Russell right there in the beginning of that final stint, after they had the safety car. He might have been able to even go up there and battle with Piastri, even though Piastri was just on another level this weekend. But he goes in there, he fights a little too hard, he gets a little too aggressive. Maybe he's pushing himself a little bit too much, and he goes off the track and then has to give the spot right back to Hamilton. And that really kind of, stopped that momentum that he had. Look at the very beginning of the race. He gets himself so amped up, had the best start reaction time in the entire field, damn near. And he had rolled ahead of the box by 35 centimeters or something like that. It came out to be. So it's like you have all these issues, you're getting all these penalties, you're doing all this stuff, but then you're still fighting back and still getting a podium. That to me deserved a driver of the day vote from me. And it's not me just being a McLaren homer or something like that. I think that when you see situations like that, yeah, there was mistakes that he made, but to fight back, it's like one of those things like Verstappen getting a penalty and getting put in the back of the field, and then are getting put, in the lower half of the field, and then fighting up to get a podium or fighting up to get a win. It's one of those situations of you have this adversity, you have all these things that are happening to you, and yeah, some of them are your fault, some of them are things that you did, but you still fight. But yeah, you're right. All of them were his fault. All of them were his fault this weekend, but he still fought back and he still, came back into it. I'm disappointed in the fact that he wasn't able to be up there at the top of the field with Piastri, the entire race. But again, this could have gotten so much worse for Lando.
I actually don't. So I don't think I've ever disagreed with you as much as I do on this point. I think he was a disaster. I think he blew the weekend,
which is warranted.
That qualifying is just unacceptable to put that thing in sixth. And then, like you said, he was so amped up to try and make. I think his biggest mistake is he lacked maturity. And it's not the effort, it's the maturity this whole weekend. After he screwed up in qualifying, like I think a more experienced driver, maybe a more level-headed driver, understand I have the fastest car over the course of 57 laps. I'm going to work my way through it. Instead, he's like so amped up, he jumped the start penalty. And then he gets the undercut to kind of get the 5 seconds back. He didn't really gain a place, but he got all the time back. So he's still in there. And then his performance on those overtakes was immature. He was diving in out of control. And when you see, and this is the nature of this generation of cars, right? You can't follow very much. They have we spend a lot of time talking about DRS. The car in front is able to strategically deploy their battery and get boosts out of that. They jokingly call it push to not be overtaken instead of push to pass. And so you do really have to bide your time, close the gap up, and do it at the right time. Because if you screw up a pass, you got to back off. You got to let everything cool down. They get to recharge their batteries. You're talking about several more laps. It's not just, I can get them at the next corner. I can get them on the next lap. You basically have to crescendo to that pass. And he was diving in there like an idiot and causing himself a lot of time when if he just, even on the safety car restart, what was he doing all the way out on? All he had to do was just, if Leclerc is going to defend that aggressively on the inside, just move to the racing line like Hamilton did. You'll sweep past everyone. Like he's out there. And I mean, we've obviously both of us have watched a ton of racing. When he was over there, I'm like, well, definitely Hamilton's just going to pass him around the outside because he left the whole racing line open. Yeah. Like he wasn't thinking behind. He's thinking, I got to make up for all of the screw ups in one turn. You're not going to do that. And then the way he tried to overtake Leclerc, he blew that so many times. Even he said after the race, like, I made a lot of mistakes trying to overtake him. Like and even the overtaking of Hamilton off the track. Look, you blew it. You lost the place. Slot in behind. Like I said, bide your time. You're going to pass him. He's on the hards. Those tires suck, and you're in a faster car. You're going to get him. You're going to get Leclerc then, and then you're going to get Russell because you're faster than all of them. Instead, it was, I got to get Hamilton right now, or I'm going to get stuck. And he dove and went off the track, obviously, to pass, and then had to give it back, which takes way more time. And that allowed Leclerc to then open the gap further, so that it took him longer to catch him, took him longer to pass him. And again, that time he spent behind Leclerc is why he wasn't able to pass Russell. And it was very immature. And I was disappointed that look, everyone has bad laps in qualifying. So I actually did not. Did you rewatch the onboard to figure out what happened? He was way off the pace. Everyone else was improving, and he was going yellow in sectors, and it was like, why are you going slower and everyone else is going? So maybe he made a mistake. So that happens to everyone. Everyone has that, especially with the number of races. You're going to have multiple times this year where it's just like, oh, man, I just didn't have it on that one. Because it really does, especially like a track like this where it's improving constantly. It's a one-lap thing. It's your second lap in the Q3 is all that's going to matter. Yeah. So anyone can make a mistake or just not have a good lap and have it impact. I thought as a response to that, he should have gone to the race saying, other than Oscar, I'm so much faster than everyone else. I'm just going to work my way through, and I'm going to beat them all. And instead, it was like he was trying to make up for it all in one corner multiple times. It's just like, no, there's 57 laps. There's plenty of time. And I think a mature drive, he captured second. Now, he got a lot of breaks, right? The safety car was exactly what he needed because Leclerc had gotten in front of him and was pulling away because he had to pit so early to undercut to make up for the penalty. So he was also, Leclerc was about to put a huge gap between him and Norris and then switch to the softs and be faster even. So, and instead he got away with it because of the safety car came at the right time for him. So, he caught some breaks with that and he still just couldn't get. At that point, when, coming out of the safety car and he's fourth with mediums and he's got Leclerc in front of him on hards and Russell in front of him on softs and like 20-something laps left to right, you're like, this is an easy second place.
Yeah.
And he screwed it up again. And it's just, he's got to be more level-headed. There's a lot of race left, but they say he's the championship leader. If he wants to win that championship, he can't do this.
Yeah.
There's no excuse for not finishing. That car was so much faster than everyone else.
Yeah, and I agree with everything you just said. The only reason, like I said, that I give him a little bit of credit is just the fact that, like I said, he did kind of bounce back from it and still end up on the podium. It could have gotten a lot worse. It could have, finished outside the top 5 if things would have gone a different way, or if he wouldn't have been able to, or at least had the fastest car out there. If he would have been in a different car, it would have been a different story. But I agree with everything you said. He was out of control making some of those moves, and he was pushing. But I think that goes into like what I was saying, which was, he's so hard on himself right now, and he's being so hard on himself, these past 2 weeks, that I think that he's trying to show that he is that top tier driver, that number one driver. I think when he got up behind Leclerc and he said, and you could hear the announcers on the radio, oh, if they finish like this, it's gonna be a tie, and Piastri is gonna, these guys aren't dumb. They understand how the points work. He understands if he had, I don't think, maybe he knew the exact numbers, but he knew if he was on the podium, it was going to be a lot better for him in the point standings. So for him to then come back, make sure he got past Leclerc, get that podium, and still be ahead in the championship, it bodes well for him, moving forward. And I want to see how he can respond coming into this week. This track in Jeddah is going to be a very fast circuit. It's going to be a very flowing circuit. So we'll get into that when we start talking about this week's race. So maybe it'll help out. Maybe it'll be a little bit better for him. Maybe a little bit more suited towards his driving style. While Piastri, the last 2 tracks, has just looked a lot better.
Yeah, and speaking of how Lando responds, he's got a 3-point lead. Piastri has frankly been more consistent this year, so he's really got to step his game up. This could, at the end of the year be, who was able to finish second more times when, they weren't the lead car. Because McLaren, if these guys are fighting neck and neck, they're not going to be able to put their thumb on the scale. It is really just going to have to be, you guys fight it out. And at that point, finishing second versus finishing third versus finishing fourth can make the difference.
Sure.
But the other thing is, as Evan, as you're an old school McLaren fan as well, I am already starting to get flashbacks to 2007 when Alonso and Hamilton were fighting and what was clearly the fastest car, and then Kimi just wins the championship because they fought each other and it caused each other to lose to the point that he collected enough points to end up in front of them in an inferior car. And I am a little there's a lot more races now than there were back then, and the way that they do the points is different. That was still back in the 10 points for a win era, so it's less likely for something like that to happen. The way that played out with the way the scoring is done, the number of races, but that one definitely, flashbacks to that here, where clearly have the fastest car, to have 2 of the best drivers on the grid, and instead of working together, they end up fighting it out and allowing essentially a one driver team to collect all of the points for their team and win. And you're seeing Max like a hawk just sitting there 8 points off the job. It's and things have knocked on his way this year, and he's only 8 points off. That's a scary proposition if they ever get that Red Bull in gear, and then you have Max in it, and then you're thinking, oh man, we blew this in the first 5 races, and we should have put a big gap in.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about 2007. I almost see, Mercedes with the Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton situation right now. And in that sense, I would put Lando as the Rosberg. Because I think that Piastri is really kind of showing that he can be that next generational talent moving forward, next big driver for McLaren. And Lando's kind of the old head, coming into this. And what would happen if he wins a championship this year and then somebody else wants to try to swoop in and get him? Because is McLaren going to sit there and try to match it? Or are they going to let him go and just roll Piastri? Because they know that Piastri could be their number one, with anybody else on the team. So I see that kind of situation coming into play as well. I do like the fact that they are still saying within the team that this is they're both our number one drivers. We're not favoring either one. We're letting them race and stuff like that. So that's still good to see. For the time being, we keep on talking about they're going to have to make that decision at some point.
One of them has to pull away and show that they're the number one driver, right? Otherwise, they can't.
And right now, it almost seems like Piastri is going to be that guy, and which would
ahead though. So
he is ahead. But I mean, realistically, if that the situation is going to happen like how it did in Australia, Piastri could be the championship leader right now.
Piastri, it did happen though, and Norris was controlling that race. Actually, that was by far his best weekend. He qualified up front,
sure.
He was in control. He navigated very challenging weather conditions and kept the car in front the whole time. So
for sure.
So I mean, I know, if Piastri didn't spin out, he would have finished second. But that was Lando's. It was what Jacques Villeneuve said last weekend, right? Like, you can say about Piastri, he looks faster in the car. He's doing this. He's doing that. You look at the standings.
Yeah,
we're looking at him right now. It says Norris number one, so it makes it very difficult to then say, well, we're going to prioritize the guy who's not winning. So. What this is doing, though, is, they call them papaya rolls, which basically means don't hit each other and be careful. That and also if we do a strategy call and it puts one of you in front, we're going to restore the positions. I think that's the other half of it that we saw play out last year. If there's a threat behind, so they pit the second driver first to avoid an undercut, and he undercuts the lead driver, they're going to swap them back. I think we kind of know those ground rules.
Yeah.
But other than that, qualifying in front gives you all the advantage there. And so I think it's putting even more pressure on the qualifying. Because in the race itself, unless you get them in the first corner or two, it's not team orders as much as just you're guaranteed to not get past in the pits because we're going to make you give the place back. And then we all know that McLaren just runs so much better in clean air that, if you're in front after a lap in that McLaren, you tend to just control it. It's so much better in clean air. So that'll put qualifying in a big focus this coming week, which we're about to talk about in a second after we look at the driver's standings. George Russell is keeping that Mercedes team. He's podium every week, gets a lot of points. It'd be shocking if they can actually compete with the McLaren. I don't think so. So as we talked about last week, I don't think McLaren's even worried about the constructors. They're going to win it.
Yeah. I mean, before we move on though, can we give a shout out to one Pierre Gasly for a fantastic race, showing that there is still some life in that Alpine, that they're not completely dead, that they are still trying to do something. You get Kick Sauber and Alpine with points in the constructors. Well, last year, Sauber didn't even get a single point the entire year. So it's good to see that there is different drivers up there that are battling each week, and even somebody like Ocon and Bierman up there having good races in the Haas. So it was kind of refreshing to see him, and you could hear the excitement on the call during the race. All the announcers and everybody just talking about how impressive he was looking, fighting up there with the Mercedes and the Ferraris throughout the entire race.
Yeah, and one of the that's a great point. It was, and again, we talked about last week how much they were struggling and how it was embarrassing for a works team, and so for them to recover like that, and one of the things you don't realize, we make sort of make fun of these teams in the back, and they stink, and what's the point? They're still the people behind the scenes there, like you said, the people in the factory that working just as hard as the teams, the people in McLaren. And so for them to, last year Kick Sauber didn't score a point the whole year. Everyone has scored. They all have had that moment at least. Look, we put all this work in there. And, like you said, for Alpine, I think that car still stinks. I think it's going to be near the back most weekends. But, for this weekend, thanks to Gasly's, heroic drive there, they got to see their car run up there with the Ferraris and the McLarens and the Mercedeses. And, for the people that put, like I said, just as much effort, time, and energy into it as the top teams, that's a great reward for them. There's actually it's an older documentary at this point on Amazon Prime called Grand Prix Driver. And this was back when God, it's probably like 6, 7 years old at this point. But this is back when Alonso and Stoffel Van Dorn were the McLaren drivers. And it was really following their partnership with Honda, which by the end of it, that was the year they kicked Honda out and went to Renault.
That was the orange and black McLaren, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think at that point they were making it more orange. It was the last year they did Honda engines. By the end of they followed them for essentially from the car design through the season. A little bit less so on the season. It's called Grand Prix driver, I think. But you could they flew the engines in from like Japan because they're Honda engines. Come to the factory, fire it up, doesn't start, and you could just see everyone's face like sink, and they couldn't get the stupid thing. And it's just like they couldn't figure out why. They were having to machine new parts because it didn't fit. And it's just like, and they'd shown these people all the work they put in to get to that point. And it's just like it didn't work.
Yeah.
And like, what do you? And so you kind of think about those people when they have these moments where like Sauber scored points. It was a year without scoring points.
Yeah.
And so it's really great that, like you said, everyone scored points. And shout out to Gasly because that car did not belong where he put it, but he drove the hell out of it.
I'm telling you, I'm excited about next year to see what happens with Aston Martin and Honda. Because if you look, going into a Formula One history tangent here, if you look in the history of Formula One, and especially the last 30, 40 years, Honda has been one of the most dominant forces in Formula One. The McLarens in the mid 80s and early 90s with Honda. You go into when they were a works team, they didn't have the best car in the field. They had issues, but then the year after in 2009, that car for what was a bronze GP was a Honda. It was literally a Honda built car. The entire car was built by Honda. The whole chassis, the aerodynamics, everything was designed by Honda. They ended up throwing a Mercedes engine in it for that 2009 year and winning the championship in that crazy story from them. But then, you see them when they linked up with Red Bull and they just became a dominant force again. I mean, Honda has really shown that they are, the class of the field, especially when it comes to engine technology. Ever since we went away from Mercedes being as dominant as it was for a while, ever since especially this cost cap era, they have really shown their quality, and I think it's going to really moving forward to see them with Aston Martin, it's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, and you mentioned one of the things with the cost cap is the sliding scale, and so it's a reset next year. So whoever gets it right at the beginning is a huge advantage because it's very hard to catch up. And I mean, Red Bull finally kind of fell behind the McLaren now after years of getting less money, less time in the wind tunnel. They also obviously were penalized for the whole cheating thing. So, that took away more of their time. And, it took McLaren almost, because by the end of last year, McLaren was faster. So it was like half of that season. It took them almost the whole cycle to catch up anyway. Even though, if you win, and McLaren's experiencing that this year, they have less they have less wind tunnel time, less resources available to them as a penalty for winning the constructors last year. So Red Bull ate those penalties year after year and stayed in front because Adrian Newey's design right out the gate was so dominant. So getting off to a good start is hugely important because you can't, like you said, with the cost cap, you can't spend your way out of it.
Yeah, and that's really what Mercedes did for a lot of that time. Was you got Daimler, Mercedes, one of the biggest car manufacturers in the world. So realistically, that's what we saw during that dominant run. Was you had the most dominant driver in his era, in almost any era of racing, with Lewis Hamilton, with then the best car and the best engine, and he was as dominant as he was. So.
Yep, no, for sure. Next year will be interesting. This weekend, we're in Saudi Arabia. this track, man. Every year we're like, they gotta change it. There's no way. This is way too dangerous, and we come right back to it, and here we go again. So, a little bit of speed on this track, right?
Just a little. I've always liked to say this thing looks like a paper clip on a piece of paper. It's one of the it's one of the most interesting design tracks that we're going to see all year. It's basically you go back and forth. It's one line with some turns in it, and another line with some turns in it with a couple hairpins at the very end on each side. So it's definitely an interesting track. It's not one of my favorites in particular. I think that there's a lot of walls. There's everything that these guys are going to get so close to all the way around this entire track. And on top of the fact that it's one of the fastest tracks in Formula One, that DRS zone, you're looking at a DRS zone between turns 19 and 22 where you're turning during a DRS zone. There's not a lot of times in Formula One where you're turning during DRS zones. So usually the DRS flap closes when you start to turn your wheel. But they have this 3 different DRS zones. That whole section between 4 and 12. I mean, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9 turns within probably a quarter mile of racetrack. It's kind of it's a street circuit, so this is what you got to kind of expect. It's similar, to nothing else in the entire field. Maybe Monaco is the closest thing that you could say, but just the fact that these cars can go as fast as they do around this track at the G's that they pull, it's definitely an interesting one. It's like I said, it's not my favorite track, but it's definitely an interesting track.
Yeah, and we actually referenced this a little bit last week. This is the track where you start getting into turn 26. If you're the Turo car, you don't really want to overtake before the hairpin there and into turn 27 because and this is why we like that Bahrain didn't do a new detection zone and it carried through so it wouldn't penalize, because this detection zone on right after the hairpin, you're going to get passed right back on so this is the one where you see drivers comically slamming on their brakes going into the detection zone and then coming out of the speed trap trying to stay behind so that they can then pass. It's just, this race does have like you said, it's not one of my favorites either. It has a sense of a farce to it. It's the one where Max was supposed to give the place back to Hamilton, slammed on his brakes in the start finish straight to try and force Hamilton to pass him at the time where he could then immediately pass him back, which I'm sure was ironic for Hamilton, who had a race win taken away for doing that exact thing in Belgium once. And yeah, so there tends to be some gamesmanship. I'll be interested to see if McLaren does have some, we'll get into, I guess, predictions, but if they're running at the front, do they have some sort of team orders like, hey, none of this crap where you're purposely trying to get behind to overtake and slowing both cars down. You guys pull away first, and then you can start messing around like that, because it does slow both cars down when you do that. You're both intentionally going slower than optimal. But yeah, I don't like the back-to-back DRS zones there. I think at the very least there should just be one detection point, and because it does result in gamesmanship. No one wants to. You don't want to be the lead car if you're close going into the hairpin.
Yeah.
So it incentivizes not overtaking on the DRS straight. But we'll see. This is a different time of year than it's traditionally been held. So I think it's the first time it's in April. So that'll be interesting. And they've come with some tire choices here, which are head open, but we will get to them. This is them. So we've got kind of the middle set here. Thoughts?
I mean, these are the softer set, right? This is the softer end of the line, because the one is the hardest, right? So I like the fact that they're going with the softer set of tires. I think it's kind of fitting for a track like this, being that it is a street circuit. This is one of those places that if I'm not mistaken, was it last year that Sergio Perez won this race? That Checo won this race. It was one of the last ones that he won with Red Bull.
Maybe that was last year.
So I think that it's a good situation that they're going with the softer tires, not just because of the fact that they're going to need the extra grip, being that it's a street circuit, being that it's not a dedicated track that's all rubbered in from racing on it all the time. Um, but also the wear factor. We want to see we want to see pit stops. We want to see strategy. We don't just want to see them come in one time and run the whole race basically, on two sets of tires. We want to see that aspect of a Formula One race. And I think the fact that they're able to, or that they are choosing to go a little bit harder, it'd be interesting to see which ones they went on last year. Because I wonder if last year they ran a little bit harder compound, and they wanted to change it up going into this race this weekend, because they want to see if it's going to help with that, with
I think there is a little bit of an unknown based on time of year, because they usually don't do it at this time of year. So remember, it was historically one of the last races. And then I think last year I want to say they ran it a little bit later.
I thought they ran it early. I thought it was an early.
It wasn't in April. So maybe it was in March.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, this is the first time at this time of year now. The weather is just 90s and hot and no precipitation. But yeah, I think this does open up to, like you said, probably a little bit more aggressive pit strategies. Again, we talked about, I mean, half the track is DRS zones on straights. If you can't overtake here, then you can't overtake anyway. So I think all the teams would expect to be able to overtake to less of it, because there have been tracks, where it's been, kind of reverted back to it's really hard to overtake here. This is definitely not one of those. So
yeah,
I think the expectation would be that I think we're going to see more pit stops versus less here.
Yeah, when we get into predictions, I think that it's gonna. I think I have an interesting take that's gonna come out into this, because there's, the other aspect that you have to think about is, like, there are some drivers in the field who are just better at street circuits, that are just better, racing on these type of tracks, that because you need a certain set of confidence and a level of comfort in a car to be able to race in these circuits. That's why I said, about Checo last year. Checo was kind of the guy who was known for these street circuits. He was somebody who was very confident running close to those walls. And you have that wall right there, an inch away from your tire. You got to have some type of nerve, or else you're not going to be able to extract all of the performance out of each lap. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. I think that, like I said, with that tire choice, I think they even could have gone to that C6. Maybe they just aren't quite there yet.
I think it's that spec tire that they haven't used. I forget that they the first place they said they're going to use is Imola.
Okay.
So
I think that'd be interesting to see that run in qualifying at Monaco or something like that, because they're going to need that extra grip. So we'll see how it works out.
Going on with their extra forced pit stop.
Yeah.
Stops now. They've done some things there. Anyway, the race timings. Practice is 9:30 on Friday. Practice 1 is. Practice 2, 1 o'clock on Friday. Practice 3, Saturday, 9:30. Qualifying 1 p.m. on Saturday, and the race 1 p.m. on Sunday. Evan, it is this time. You almost jumped the gun, but you're right on time here. Predictions.
Just to be positive, it's 1 p.m. for us, but it's going to be a night race there, correct?
Yes, yeah, it's a night race. I think it's way too hot to run during the day in Saudi Arabia. So.
It is a beautiful looking track. I will tell you that Jeddah is one of the, when you see the flyover videos of this track, it's a gorgeous track. It's right on the beach. It's a sight to see. Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting weekend. So going into predictions, there's a driver who has been the model of consistency this year, who has looked very good and is a street circuit guy, somebody who has done well at street circuits before. If I'm not mistaken, his last win was at a street circuit. Am I correct?
I know who you're talking about, I suspect, but I don't remember the last one.
Vegas, maybe?
Was it?
Was it Vegas or Singapore, one of those two?
I honestly don't remember.
So he is somebody who runs good at street circuits, and he has been the model of consistency this year. I am going George Russell to win the race. I don't think there's been anybody who could say anything super bad, even us George Russell haters, about how he's performed this year. He stepped up. He's shown that he's the number one driver. He's shown, that Mercedes, team, that even though they have this nice new shiny toy in Kimi Antonelli, that they're gonna look forward to having, for the next 10 to 15 years or something like that. That he is there and he is performing. I'm gonna go with him 1, Lando 2, and Oscar 3. I think Lando has a chance at this race. I think that and I've been saying it every week, but I think that he has a better chance at a track like this over Piastri, because I think that we saw it at Albert Park, which is technically still a street circuit in Australia. He is good at street circuits, and maybe he's a little bit more confident and a little bit more comfortable with driving up against those walls. And even though Albert Park isn't as tight as Jeddah is or Monaco or something like that, that is something you have to get used to as a Formula One driver. It's not something that you can't learn that until you're in those cars. And Lando's got years and years now of racing at this track, of racing, on circuits like that, while this is Oscar's 3rd year doing it. So I'm going to go with Lando to come in second, Oscar to come in third. I'm going to say my surprise of the week is I'm going to say that Hadjar is going to be the second best Red Bull driver overall this week. Hadjar is going to be the second best Red Bull driver overall this week. He's going to be ahead of Yuki. He's going to be ahead of Liam Lawson, which that's not that hard to predict Liam Lawson, but
beating the big brother of the little brother car is definitely counts.
Yeah,
I mean, Liam Lawson is going to be out of the sport pretty quickly.
Yeah, so I'm gonna put Isaac Hadjar as the second best Red Bull driver of the week. How about you?
I'm definitely not picking George Russell. I'm gonna go with Max. I'm gonna go Max to win. Leclerc second, Oscar third, and then I'm going to. All right, let me know if this one counts. I'm gonna say more than 2 safety cars.
Yeah, that counts.
All right,
that counts.
I feel like Lando's going to be involved in one of them.
Okay, so are you putting that in the prediction?
No, I'm just saying more than 2 safety cars. And involved doesn't necessarily mean he crashes, but like I think there's going to be a little bit of a mix because the timing of those is determined this race multiple times. Like you said earlier when we were talking about the track, it's lined with walls, and we have a lot of rookies. They're going to hit them, and if they hit them, we actually didn't talk about this a lot, but in that pit stop, we talked about how Ferrari, the safety car hurt them. It killed Antonelli.
Oh yeah,
it just pitted, and so someone's gonna get screwed when at the time of these safety cars, and I feel like maybe it's Lando, and that's how he falls out of the top 5.
Yeah, and even going back into that, man, Carlos Sainz, I feel so bad for him right now.
Yeah, he is having a great race, finally stretching his legs as a Williams driver.
And then he gets into it with Yuki.
Yeah, Yuki just hit him and ripped up the car, and that's that. And then did they not give him a...
They gave him a penalty for this week.
Well, no, they took it back because they're idiots. So this is actually, we didn't even unpack all of the mistakes they made. So they said he didn't serve the penalty. He actually did. He went and served it and then continued racing.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And then they said he didn't and penalized him, and the appeal was, we served this. They're like, my bad. Because I don't know what they were doing this weekend. It was a farce.
Yeah.
So
it was not the FIA's best.
His penalty was for leaving the track or something. What was his?
It was something like that,
right?
Yeah, it was some weird thing. I
I
forget
think the
exactly.
penalty was for track limits because the car had a big hole in it and he couldn't keep it on the track.
Yeah.
Hold on, but then let me get exactly what it was. But okay, yeah, wrong penalty enforced. Okay, it was grid penalty following his retirement. It was rescinded.
Yeah.
Sainz had a 10-second time penalty during the race for causing a collision with Kimi Antonelli. He served the punishment on, and then so he went in there and served it, and then continued, and then retired,
Mhm.
and then the FIA their automated system did not record that he served it, even though he did, and so they penalized them again.
I mean, the FIA hasn't had the best week. We could say that they lost their what was it, the number 2 guy for the FIA quit on them or left. So the president of the FIA is under a lot of scrutiny right now. There's a lot of things that there's a lot of people that want him out of there, and there's people that feel like they can go in and do a better job. So we're gonna have to see how that all plays out. Especially moving into this next year. We could see a complete reset between FIA, the FIA president, and with the new formula that's coming out. It's going to be the next, let's say, 9 to 12 months is really going to be interesting in this sport.
Yeah, I mean they've never recovered from 2021, and I don't know if they will. Because the one thing with this sport, whether it was, they've always fallen back on the rules being the rules, and we've enforced them down to the minute. And whether it's fair or not, very strictly enforce everything. And over the course of multiple races, if you recall, before Hamilton had that ridiculous drive in Brazil, they disqualified him for what was clearly a damaged wing. Like, who has a DRS where half of it's open?
Yeah.
Right, and that damage is not supposed to be penalized. They penalized him for that. They didn't penalize Max for running him off the track multiple times in that race. So going into that race, there was already skepticism, and when they just essentially invented new safety car rules on the fly, and you can hear it after the race. Obviously, Mercedes, Toto's losing his shit and all that, but you can hear that.
No, Michael. You
got to switch him back, but then you can hear. The way you can tell it was screwed up is all the other drivers that weren't really involved on their radios to their teams being like, what was that?
Yeah, what just happened?
I'm halfway down the track. Why did they restart? It's just like it was all and they're all like, I don't understand what happened. Like, we didn't follow any of the rules. What's going on? And it was all just so Max would have a chance to pass it. And so you can't recover. And they had opportunities to get out from under that. One of the easier ones that could have undid the wrong would have just simply been, if you recall, under that safety car, Max actually briefly went in front of Hamilton. It's that thing they banned now where you can't move. Now they're like, you can't be on side of them at all.
Yep.
Or back then you could pull up next to them as long as you didn't pass. He actually moved in front at one point. They should have just given him a penalty and said, oops.
Yeah.
Have undid the way they manipulated the race. And everyone would be like, well, that's a little cheap penalty, but it was the result. They passed that. They didn't. They ended up, it ended up falling apart on them, and now no one trusts them. And ever since then, they have not, adhered strictly to the letter of the law. And so there's no trust. And I think that's why you see the rules people, because the people entrusted to enforcing these, they literally get out a caliper, measure these things, millimetrically off. And then to be told we're not doing that. We're going to kind of just figure it out. Like, that's not what they signed up for. And that's why you're seeing, for lack of a better word, the expertise just walk out the door because they don't want to deal with the politicization and depends on what we're feeling this week. And the stewards are politicized as well, because the stewards are not, for those that aren't aware, they're like former drivers and stuff. They're not the actual experts on the rules.
Yeah.
And so it's become farcical, and that's why you're seeing people walk out. Yeah, I know F1's never been more popular and never made more money, and also, the downside of that is they got to keep the interest in there, and it does feel like some of these decisions are manipulative when in the past it has been very much. I don't care what this does. I don't care the outcome of this. We're going to enforce the rules down to the letter, and that's just not necessarily. Again, we went back. Like I think it's fine they didn't penalize George Russell. They theoretically should have. He opened the DRS. He wasn't allowed to.
Yeah.
Right, and so I feel like 10 years ago they 100% would have just penalized him.
For sure.
And so yeah, I mean, so for a rules person, I can see why they're leaving. Like I don't want to do this.
But in that same token, they didn't penalize him for doing that, which they could have, but then they do penalize Lando for moving up a quarter of an inch outside of his pit box.
Yeah.
Stopping and then starting.
Yeah.
Which gave him zero tactical advantage in the grand scheme of
things. That's the challenge when you start, and that's why they could always, whether you agreed with their rulings or not, and I think a lot of people were frustrated by you penalized them for that, and it was like minor things. You could always fall back on it. It clearly says 22 millimeters, and this is 21.99999 millimeters. That is a disqualification. You can fall back on that. And now when they're saying, oh, we're going to kind of let this one go or let that one go, then everything is suspect then.
Yeah, for sure.
And and the original sin was 4 years ago, and you can't get out from under that. Because nothing they did with that safety car was in the rule book.
No.
Just made it up.
Yeah.
They violated their own rules. They didn't let them catch up the pack. Like all of this stuff. Yeah. That's just like insane.
Still one of the greatest team radio calls in the history of Formula One. No, Michael. No, Michael.
Well, because it was just, I mean, it was.
He was pissed. Total went full Arnold Schwarzenegger there.
Well, I mean, so it was a farce. Like the rules are black and white in terms of the options available to them. And that's why they initially said, we're not going to let the cars unlap themselves because that's the only way they could even restart the race.
Yeah.
Because they've modified it a little bit now, but back then the rule was you have to let all of the lap cars unlap themselves, catch up to the back of the pack, do an additional lap,
and then go.
And then restart. And there were not enough laps to do all of that.
Yeah.
And so it would have just ended under safety car, which is probably the correct. Unfortunately, that season was awesome, and they didn't want to end under a safety car. The other option is you don't let anyone unlap, and you can restart.
Which would have put Max.
Which would have put 5 or 6 cars between Max and Lewis, and you never would have passed him.
Yeah.
Because he had to do it right at the beginning, because that was the only passing point was at the beginning. In Abu Dhabi, there's no passing on the back half of it. It would have had to have been. And so that's why their initial – and that's probably even what made it even more controversial, right? Their initial radio call out to teams is we're not going to let cars unlap themselves because they did. They looked at like, at least that way we can get a lap in, is what they were thinking. And instead, then they said – then they only let – then all of a sudden they changed their mind. They let only the cars in between. They even, I mean, that announcement's famous now, right? You see the 5 car numbers that they're letting unlap. No one else is allowed to.
They're only going to let them unlap.
Yeah, they only let them. And then they didn't actually follow even the unlap rules because they let them go through. They never even caught up. They were somewhere in the back half of the circuit when they restarted and went through. And it was just, they pulled a safety car in the same lap. They let them unlap themselves. They didn't actually let them fully unlap themselves. They just moved them out of the way, essentially. Yeah. And they restarted immediately, and that just none of that was allowable by rule. So that was the original one that kind of now no one trusts them for anything. So
this is true.
Anyway, so I think it'd be interesting to see, when there's a new president, if we see kind of a little bit of a return to some consistent enforcement, because right now it's anyone's guess.
For sure. And I'd like to see it not just for Formula One, but for the rest of the series under the FIA's purview. So we'll see how it all works out.
All right, but for this weekend, Saudi Arabia, and so it should be a fun one. The championship's actually very close. So we'll see. This is, like you said, a high-speed circuit. We haven't really had one yet, so
not like this.
Not like that. Well, I don't think there isn't. I guess maybe Azerbaijan in places, but there isn't really another one like this. That's just all gas, no brakes. So we'll see how this goes. And then Evan, 2 weeks after that, it is the home race.
I know. I'm excited
Coming up. It's coming up.
for sure.
All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us as always, and we'll be here next week, same time, or
All
actually maybe earlier. We'll see. We'll Tuesday night.
We'll be here.
Yep. Thanks, Evan.
All right.